So the question was what to do about this problem of there being slightly different times in different places. And it was the railways that came up with a solution. So because they were trying to keep to their timetables and let people know when the trains were coming, they started to all use times from certain places. And it was around 1840, so about 180 years ago, that they began to use London time to plan their timetables. And so the train companies would tell everybody that that was the time that they were working off of, and the people would then check what time it was in London, and they would know what time to get their train. And gradually, all across the country, other people started to use it too. So by the end of 1848, almost all the trains across the UK used London time. So in about 8 years, they'd gone from everybody using different times to starting to get everybody using the same time. And the time that they used in London is called Greenwich Mean Time. And it's called Greenwich Mean Time because it is set by using the time of midday at Greenwich Observatory. So Greenwich Observatory is this place down here. And it's a place where they would sort of study the sky and study the stars. This is a big telescope on the top here. And so it was a good place to work out where exactly midday was for it. And this line that runs through the middle of Greenwich, this one here, is called the Greenwich Meridian. And it's by looking from that line and seeing at what point the sun is at the highest point in the sky and deciding when midday is, that they were able to come up with Greenwich Mean Time. And this is the time that all the train companies started using and started telling people about across the country. And it was a good place because it was already there and they were already keeping track of time from there. So they didn't need to build anything new. They could just use what was already there. And this time became known as Greenwich Mean Time because it was the average time. We know that mean means average, the average time in Greenwich. And by 1880, so about 40 years after the trains started to use London time, the whole of the UK had started to use this Greenwich Mean Time. And other countries started to think that this was a good idea as well. And in 1884, 4 years later, people from 26 different countries got together and agreed that they would start to use Greenwich Mean Time as the time to set their clocks from as well. And one of the people who was really involved in this was a guy called Sir Sandford Fleming. And this is a picture of him. And he was a Scottish-Canadian inventor. So he was born in Kirkcaldy in 1827. And when he was 18, he moved across to Canada to work on the railways and to work making maps. And he came to this conference, the International Meridian Conference, in 1884, and was part of the group that was trying to convince people that it would make everything much easier if all the countries around the world used one point to measure their time off of. And he wanted this to be the prime meridian. So if you think about our AM and PMs, that use meridian with an M at the end. And this is meridian with an N at the end, but it's to do with midday point. Okay, so if you remember, AM was ante-meridian, which meant before midday, and PM was post-meridian, which meant after midday. Looking for an international meridian is finding one point where midday is measured from. And because they were already doing that in Greenwich, they decided at this conference that they would use Greenwich Mean Time as the prime meridian, so the main point from which time would be measured for the whole of the world. And so they used the Greenwich Meridian and they worked out from that point a line that would go from the North Pole all the way through the Greenwich Meridian that was already being measured, down through parts of Africa and right down to the South Pole. And this Greenwich Meridian became known as the prime meridian of the world. And from this point, all other time across the world started to be worked out so that it would all work together and people would be able to communicate knowing that they were using the same type of time. And the Greenwich Mean Time was the way that time was measured all the way from 1884 until 1972. And in 1972, it was tweaked a little bit. So it was turned into something called Coordinated Universal Time. And it's still based off of the time at Greenwich, but there's been some tiny adjustments to try and make it even more accurate. And now there's people trying to make the Coordinated Universal Time even more accurate than it is already. So that might be something, if you want to go and do a little bit more of your own research, you could go and find out a bit more about Coordinated Universal Time. You could find out why as well the abbreviation is not CUT, like it should be for Coordinated Universal Time, but actually UTC.